anyone who might be watching from home through YouTube. My name is Dawa, and I lead the Meltano team at GitLab. If you've checked the group conversation document, you'll see that I've put a couple of links in there related to some of the significant announcements I'm planning to make over the next week regarding Meltano's direction and strategy and focus. And I'm very excited to answer any questions you might have about those changes. I see that a couple of questions are already popping up in the doc. Brett, you're first. Would you like to verbalize your question? All right, maybe not. Then I'll verbalize it for him. Okay, no, there you go.
Sorry, I had some background noise. I was just trying to reduce that. No, I haven't fully read all the announcements and things. I was expecting those to be part of this conversation, but my understanding is we're shifting the focus of Meltano and out from not a product to maybe something else. And I'm curious, since a lot of my customers are really interested in AI, ML, building that, GitHub can obviously host like that code and some kind of Jupyter Notebook story. I'd love for us to have I think an even better story around that. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts or opinions, or if we can leverage the smart individuals that worked on Meltano for that.
I mean, to be clear, in your written question, it stated specifically, are there plans to leverage that knowledge to enhance GitLab in the AI and ML space? And I want to make it clear that as far as GitLab, the product's own data strategy is concerned, Meltano is kind of separate from that. So if you want to know, like, what might GitLab one day offer to our, existing install base in terms of AI and ML tooling or some kind of support in the product, that's really not something I would know anything about. What we're doing with Meltano is, the end-to-end vision from the beginning has been to build a end-to-end tool for data teams where all of these people can kind of work together, all the way from the data engineers who might be in charge of setting up the data integration, all the way to the people at the end, the actual analysts or scientists. But the conclusion we've come to is that that is a very big chunk of work to bite off in one bite, and to try to get a community around that will build it with us. So now we've focused specifically on only data ingestion. So that means that anything to do with data scientists at the end of the life cycle are actually using that ingested data to make any kind of predictions or do any kind of machine learning, that is completely out of scope for Meltano. And it's honestly kind of a distraction at this point to spend too much time thinking or talking about that from our perspective, because this open source tool that GitLab wants to build in the data space will one day hopefully be end-to-end, but we really have to start, per what I've kind of been figuring out over the last couple of weeks, we really have to start at the beginning of that data life cycle, which is with data integration. And as far as Meltano is concerned, it will be a while, probably in a matter of multiple years, until we would try to get into the data science or data analytics step of that cycle, basically. So maybe this is not quite the answer you were hoping for, Brad, but does that help? Is there maybe something else I can elaborate on?
No, it's great knowledge, and I think there's probably a lot more details in the documents and the forthcoming announcements and things. So looking forward to it. It's a hot topic. Would love to have more conversations with my customers about it. That's kind of my
cool. And to be clear, Meltano is not at all at a place where it's something that we want to be offering or selling or even talking about to our customers. It's an open source project, first and foremost, and as of this new direction, pretty much primarily, the goal is to build an open source project or an open source community and ecosystem around, self-hosted data integration. And it will probably be years before this technology is something that our GitLab customers will actually want to run in production. So from Meltano's perspective, we are just an open source project that happens to be kind of sponsored and incubated inside GitLab. But for all intents and purposes, this is completely irrelevant to anything our GitLab customers and users are doing today. So I hope that kind of sets a little bit of context regarding how Meltano fits in GitLab and the extent to which we even want to be talking to customers about this, because as far as I'm concerned, that's not at all or not very much, unless they are specifically interested in open source data ingestion. But they should realize it's still an open source project kind of in its infancy compared to some of the proprietary hosted offerings out there. All right, cool. My talking has given some other people some time to add questions into the doc. Next is Tim Poffenbarger. Would you like to verbalize your question?
Yeah, I was just curious, and I think you kind of answered this a little bit, but how GitLab plans on utilizing Meltano in the future. I know, like, we wrote a blog post regarding, how we manage managing the ELT process with Stitch and Singer and Snowflake and DBT and Periscope. Is there any hopes of kind of replacing any of that stack? And if so, what pieces?
Yeah, great question. So out of the examples that you listed, Stitch and Singer, Snowflake, DBT, and Periscope. To be clear, Periscope is the kind of analytics BI software at the end where analysis takes place. Snowflake is the actual data warehouse where our data is stored. DBT is the transformation layer where kind of changes are made to the ultimate to the extracted data model to make them more appropriate for analysis. And then at the very beginning, there's the data ingestion step, and that is where Meltano is now going to be focusing on. So that means extracting the data from the various sources, the SaaS tools or the databases that we have, and then loading them into the data warehouse. So as far as where Meltano fits into GitLab's own stack, we currently use some of these proprietary vendors I've been talking about for some of our data ingestion. And then we also have a number of kind of hand-rolled pipelines that use some of the same technology that Meltano uses under the hood. So I've been talking with Justin Stark, who is the manager for the, at least for data engineering on the data team. And he is excited about the opportunity or the possibility of at least replacing some of the hand-rolled pipelines with Meltano in the not too far off future. Once, of course, Meltano is ready to serve that task at the level of reliability and stability, etc., that GitLab needs. As far as the other parts in the stack, they're really not. And here I'm referring to DBT, Snowflake, and Periscope. Those are not tools that Meltano is attempting to compete with today. So we wouldn't be swapping those out or anything. And then as far as GitLab's use of these hosted tools is concerned, this is something where obviously the kind of end goal for Meltano would be that any company around the world can indeed decide to swap out their existing hosted proprietary data integration tooling for Meltano, but we know that we are quite a ways away from that being realistic for some of the more business critical or more important data sources that GitLab is ingesting, because as we've been saying, Meltano is really impressive. You can actually get it up and running and it does its task, but I don't think anyone on the Meltano team, including myself, is or has been under the impression that we would recommend people actually run it in production right now and swap out their existing stuff for it. But that's certainly something that would be an option for GitLab as well. And I have been happy to see that Justin Stark and other people on the data team have also been enthusiastic and inspired by this new direction. And it will be really great to have an in-house customer or user in GitLab as well. But it will be a matter of time before Meltano is ready for that responsibility.
Thanks.
Does that answer your question, Tim? Okay, perfect. Roman Kuba, you're up next.
That way. So I'm curious so, as you mentioned, like contributions was one of the key metrics of success for the open source project. What is the plan in order to get actually contributors to this? Because if there's not a lot of usage or so kind of production usage out there, who's super interested in contributing? And do we mostly account for GitLab actually being one contributing and helping the product grow? Because we try maybe to make it kind of most successful for ourselves. What's the strategy there?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. So I'll start with the end of your question there. What do we expect GitLab's role to be in contributing or kind of setting our direction here? Originally, when the Meltano project was founded about 2 years ago, GitLab was its primary and only customer at the time, and the goal was, of course, for the Meltano team to specifically build tooling that would support the GitLab data team or enable the GitLab data team to basically start making more use of all the data that GitLab has available in its various tools. So at that time, we were very much hoping, or at least GitLab being the primary group of people that would use the tool and give us feedback, etc., even if it was mostly the Meltano team itself implementing the changes, etc. Right now, as I sketched a moment ago, we are not necessarily expecting GitLab to actually be able to use Meltano anytime soon, because of course its needs have kind of outgrown what Meltano can realize right now. So like you've pointed out, we need to really bank on getting an open source community of people around this project. And the nice thing there is that we are not starting completely from scratch in two ways. On the one hand, of course, we already have Meltano, which means that cleaning up the documentation to make it easier to install and kind of get to that initial delight of like, wow, this thing actually works. That shouldn't take too much work from now because the tool already works. The documentation is a little bit outdated, but we can update that. And then from that perspective, people who check it out and who see that it works will of course already be more likely to kind of stick with the community or at least keep an eye on it than if there was nothing to begin with. On the other side, since we are building Meltano around extractors and loaders that are written in accordance with the Singer specification, that means that the entire Singer community is hypothetically also the new or future Meltano community, because we want to be building tooling to make these Singer based extractors and loaders not just something you can run on your local machine for a cool proof of concept, but something you can actually run in production. And the Singer community right now, if you're just judging by the size of the Slack workspace, has 2,100 members in it today, and there are multiple people joining every day. So there's massive interest in open source extraction and loading, but the tooling to actually make this work in production is lacking. So the hunch is, the hope is, the assumption is that since the interest is clearly there, if we start providing the tooling and the documentation that is currently lacking in that space, as we've heard from many of the people in the Singer community that I've been talking to over the last couple of weeks, then a lot of these people, I think, will kind of naturally first check out Singer and then start looking at what are the deployment options here, what are the production tooling that exists around this, and then they'll come across Meltano and they will kind of jump over to not just be a Singer community member, but also a Meltano community member, because we will be the first and the best kind of to offer that level of tooling. So that's where I'm expecting to get the initial bunch of community members from. And like I mentioned, I've been having a number of calls over the last couple of weeks with some of the people involved in this community today, and they are all very, very excited about the fact that someone is actually coming in trying to take this on, because they've all identified the challenge, but none of them have so far been able to actually allocate the time and the resources to get this off the ground. And most of them have been rolling their own tooling and deployment setups around Singer extractors and loaders. So they are also members who are very excited to be part of this community and who want to work with us and with each other to get this off the ground. So I think in terms of a core team, which is of course kind of where you got to start with a handful of people who you can, kind of expect will actually contribute significantly instead of just coming in one day and then doing a couple of contributions and leaving again. I think we have the beginnings of that already. And I am absolutely planning on advertising these blog posts or whatever shape the announcement takes in the Singer and DBT Slack workspaces as well, because there's a lot of people there that are potentially interested in this technology. The DBT community is another interesting one because, of course, I say of course, but it might not be of course to people new to the space. DBT is a really amazing set of open source tools that allow data analytics engineers to define what they would like the analytics data model to look like, or the analytics data schema to look like relative to the actual raw extraction schema that the data comes into the data warehouse with. And there's a lot of tooling around transforming it from one into the other. And there's a massive community there that is enthusiastic about looking at taking data in the data warehouse and changing its shape, but there isn't currently a open source story for all of these people to actually get the data into the data warehouse to begin with. So most of these people, they work at companies where they use DBT, and then their company might be using one of these proprietary vendors, and that's how the data ends up in the data warehouse, and then it can be transformed from that point on. But for people in this space, if they just want to like play around with some data on the local machine, or if you're thinking about analytics engineers who might be kind of self-teaching because they're looking for a job rather than already working at a company. For these people, it will also be amazing to have some tooling they can install themselves that will allow them to pull data out of all these different data sources that they have, whether it be for kind of professional use cases, so the kind of data that GitLab would want to use. But there's also a use case here for a more hobbyist persona, where you're just a person who wants to play around with their own personal data, whether it's Strava data for running, whether it's Goodreads data for reading. And I'm calling that example out because Emily Scario, I know, has actually been interested in using Meltano for her Goodreads data. And in the DBT community, there might be many people who just want to kind of hone their analytics engineering craft and their transformation craft, and allowing these people to get data into their data warehouse quickly will also, I think, get some of these people onto the Meltano train. So we're not starting from zero here. Interest already exists, and we can start out at least by trying to capture that existing interest and really making the Singer ecosystem live up to its potential, which unfortunately currently it is not realizing because of a lack of this tooling and documentation. Does that help, Roman?
Absolutely. Thank you for that in detail.
Cool, thanks. All right, that there's no more questions on the list right now, but I think I've been able to talk about quite a lot. And of course, everyone is encouraged to check out the blog posts that I've linked to, or at least the rough drafts of the blog posts that I plan to publish later this week. And yeah, I invite everyone to give Meltano another try. I'm going to be spending some time this week and next week to get the documentation to a better shape, to make it easier for people to actually get started using and developing and contributing to Meltano. So if you're intrigued, please keep an eye on our blog and give it a try, and let me know if you run into any issues at all. And with that, thank you so much for your attention, everyone. I'm excited to see where this goes, and I'm looking forward to giving you another update 6 weeks or so from now. And in the meantime, like I mentioned, follow the Meltano blog. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.